At the age of 18, you had a flare explode next to you. And that flare resulted in 70% of body burns, third degree burns. And you spent 3 years in hospital watching nurses perform all sorts of things, causing unnecessary pains, and they refused to change despite the evidence. Where does motivation, in your view, where does that stem from? I mean, is that something that you can instill into somebody, or is that something that comes from an individual from their absolute core? Because I always have this battle between getting what I want out of somebody, but I have to find a way to get that. Do I deadline, stick, carrot? Please.
We have a lot of elements in our motivation. A lot of things can motivate us. A sense of accomplishment and progress and teamwork and achieving the impossible and a sense of satisfaction and helping each other. And you can name it. There's a lot of elements in there. Now, my sense is that we're all born with that capacity for motivation. But sometimes our experiences are reducing that. For example, if we worked for an abusive boss, we might never trust somebody again. If the workplace is causing us to look at the workplace just as a place to, I think most people have the ability to be intrinsically motivated. It's only that some companies reduce it for them. I think it's part of the human potential to be intrinsically motivated. I think
the companies reduce it?
Yeah. Okay, companies
continue.
kill it.
We make mistakes.
We learn.
We grow.
We share.
Shamelessly.
This is Shameless Tuesdays,
The digital transformation podcast brought to you by Transformation Leader.
Welcome, Shameless family, and welcome to Shameless Tuesdays. I'm Dzikamai Gangaidzo. I'm a mining engineer first and foremost, but I'm also the host of the Shameless podcast. And really, a lot of the things within my space as a mining engineer is where I look to implement digital transformation projects in probably what I think is probably one of the most hardest environments, the most stubborn sort of industry. And it's stubborn because it's really sometimes can be resistive towards change. And quite frankly, I deal with real constraints, real people who do not want to change, have their frameworks in way, and they've been doing this way, their way for a very long time, motivated by the same things or have a very clear way of how they believe motivation works. And I sit in rooms where this is actually happening. So I love talking about this stuff, and there's never a dull moment, especially when you're joined with some really great minds. And today we're joined with Dan. Hi, Dan, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Lovely to be here.
And for those of you who might not know Dan, and I'm going to give him an opportunity to probably introduce himself, but I'm going to just say two really short things about him. Dan is a professor in psychology and behavioral economics at Duke. He's also done a host of things. This includes he's currently a director at the Center of Advanced Hindsight, a co-founder of Irrational Capital, co-founder of Center of Advanced Bureaucracy. Bureaucracy? Who likes bureaucracy here? Do you like bureaucracy, Dan?
No, actually, so all the other things you said are real. The Center for Advanced Bureaucracy is a website that I created to complain about bureaucracy. It's not about the real center. It's just a way to channel my frustration out.
So if I want to channel my frustration, I just go to the Center of Advanced Bureaucracy and I too can...
That's right. Or you can create your own podcast as a way to channel some of your frustration.
Well, that's... Okay, don't give me ideas because I will then derail this whole podcast and we'll just sit here and complain with each other about bureaucracy. Some other things that you've done is co-founder of Irrational Labs and B-Works, co-founder of Sharper, New York Times bestseller author, 3 books, 40 different languages, TED speaker, 15 million plus viewers, World Economic Forum presenter. If that's not enough, your credentials even take you a further level higher. Dual PhD in cognitive psychology and business administration, 30 plus years of behavioral economics research, 100 plus research peer-reviewed papers in top journals, and MIT Media Lab Sloan School. I mean, I could go on because you've dealt with Fortune 500 companies across three different countries or four different countries, governments, Google, implementation on large scale, design, consultation, and you got your hands in sort of investment. So you've got your hands full and you're an incredibly busy person. More so than that, and this is sort of the segue, is at the age of 18, you had a flare explode next to you. And that flare resulted in 70% of body burns, third degree burns. And you spent 3 years in hospital watching nurses perform all sorts of things, causing unnecessary pains, and they refused to change despite the evidence. And at that moment, your experience turned into your profession, your life, this is not from a classroom, it's from a shared world of those burns. Dan, I'm incredibly interested to understand what the experience that you had at the age of 18 has to do with the myth of motivation and why deadlines don't work, rewards backfire, and fear kills productivity.
So lots of things. So first of all, just to be clear, the medical staff in hospital was amazing. I have a lot of gratitude toward them. And there was lots of pain that they had to inflict on me because treatment creates pain. But it turns out that there was some pain they created for me that was because they didn't understand correctly how pain works. So it wasn't intentional. But maybe I'll introduce myself slightly differently.
Go for it.
And I will say why I have this half beard. This would also introduce me and also say something about social science. So as you said, I was injured a long time ago. Most of my body is covered with scars, including the right side of my face. So all of this is scar tissue. There's no hair growing on scar tissue. Also, there's no sweat glands. But then you can say, no, that's why I have this strange look that this side doesn't have hair and this side has hair. And you can wonder, why don't I shave? Because I look very strange. I know it. And if I shaved, it would be less apparent, less strange. And for many years I shaved and I looked less strange. In fact, during the years that I shaved, one of my physicians wanted to tattoo the right side of my face to fit the left side. So like he said, shave and he'll do the stubble to shave. And about a few years ago, I went on a month-long hike. And during that month, I didn't shave. And when I left the hike a month later, I looked sort of like this. And I looked in the mirror and I said, what a strange look. I certainly don't want to look like this. I will go back to shaving. But I said, look, it took me a month to grow this half a beard. I'll never do it again. Let me keep it for a few weeks just for the fun of it. So I kept it. And two strange things happened. The first one was that a few people wrote me and thanked me for the half a beard. Now, why would anybody thank me for the half a beard? These were people who were struggling with their own injuries, and they felt they were hiding. There was a woman who left me a note saying that she had a burn on her arm, and she always wore long-sleeve shirts to hide the burn. And she said, now that I show how much I don't care, she said she's going to try it as well. So I got a few people like that said that they're getting some courage to try and hide less. So I said, okay, if I'm giving courage to some people, I'll keep this half a beard. And I kept it. And then the other strange thing happened. And the second strange thing that happened is about 4 months into this half a beard, I started feeling better about my own injury. For a long time, I felt it was me and my injury, and we were fighting. It's not like one, like it was something that was fighting with me. And all of a sudden, I felt more okay with my injury, more at peace, more like it's still difficult, still painful, but it's part of the story of my life. And I asked myself, why now? Why now? Why am I feeling better now? And I thought back to all the people who told me that they were fighting their own injuries, hiding their own injuries. And I said, for me, half shaving was also hiding. I would wake up in the morning, smooth on this side, stubble on this side. And the act of half shaving was also an act of looking less different, blending in. And stopping that was incredibly helpful. Stopping trying to not be noticeable with my disability was very helpful for self-acceptance. Now, why am I telling you all of this? For me, aside from explaining my half a beard and my history, for me, this half a beard is also the story of social science. So if you asked me 10 years ago, you said, hey, Dan, is having a half a beard a good idea? I would say, no, it's a terrible idea. In fact, I shave every day, half shave every day to eliminate it. But the reality is it was good for me. Unable to predict it would be good for me. we work a lot in life about what do we predict would make us better? What do we predict would make us happy? What do we predict will get other people to be motivated? What do we predict will get other people to be safer? The problem is that these intuitions are often not correct. And the goal of social science is to study what intuitions are correct and which intuitions are not correct. And in the case of intuitions that are not correct, it's supposed to give us some other directions of how to work. So when you ask the question about motivation, it says, okay, so what are intuitions about motivation, but what really works and what doesn't in terms of all of those things. So that's my introduction. And now we can jump to the topics. And may I recommend that we start with motivation?
You know what? I was going to start with motivation anyway. So more than happy that we start with motivation. And so my first question, or the first part of that question, is where does motivation, in your view, where does that stem from? I mean, is that something that you can instill into somebody, or is that something that comes from an individual from their absolute core? Because I always have this battle between getting what I want out of somebody, but I have to find a way to get that. So do I deadline, stick, carrot, please?
So I think it's both. But let me start with a very basic observation, which is to say that motivation is incredible. The range of human motivation is incredible. So think about something like running a marathon. I don't know if you ever ran a marathon or half a marathon. Have you?
Half a marathon.
Okay.
I was working my way to a full marathon. I didn't quite get there, but half a marathon,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I never ran a marathon. I don't plan to, but I watched people who run marathons and they don't seem happy. If you wondered if they look happy, they don't look happy. Nobody's smiling. Nobody's laughing. It's misery. And even when people finish, it's not as if they burst out laughing. No. It's, a few days to recover. It's painful. It's difficult. It's not something that the human body is supposed to do. But nevertheless, even though it's not happy, it's incredibly motivating.
Yeah.
Like when we think about human happiness, we think about sitting on the beach drinking mojito.
Yeah.
We don't think about running marathon. Running marathon is more like forced labor. It's really, 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 really tough. So even though running a marathon is not connected at all to momentary happiness, it's incredibly motivating. Where's the motivation coming from? It's coming from practice and teamwork and achieving something difficult, achieving something impossible. It's something connected to ancient Greece. It's not just a number, right? If I just made a number today, nobody would run it. It's connected to something very basic in human history. Now, if you think about that, it says that motivation is about teamwork and overcoming challenges and doing things that are impossible and so on. And all of it is part of our nature. Humanity used to do tools that are too aesthetic to be functional. Even the cavemen did tools that had beauty to them. They didn't have to make them so beautiful, but they wanted them to be beautiful. And when I ask people, I said, please think about the three things in your life that were the most meaningful. The things that people come up with are not things that are funny or make them laugh.
Yeah.
These are things that are difficult, complex, challenging. They cried, they were difficult. So I want to start by saying that we have a lot of elements in our motivation. A lot of things can motivate us. A sense of accomplishment and progress and teamwork and achieving the impossible and a sense of satisfaction and helping each other. And you can name it. There's a lot of elements in there. Now, my sense is that we're all born with that capacity for motivation. But sometimes our experiences are reducing that. So for example, if we worked for an abusive boss, we might never trust somebody again. If the workplace is causing us to look at the workplace just as a place to make money and not motivation, we're not going to be motivated. So we have this capacity for motivation. The question is whether the workplace is able to tap that capacity or not. So for example, when I said that I have this Center for Advanced Bureaucracy, for me, what bureaucracy does is to take the human capacity for motivation and tell people, please don't be motivated. You're just here to push, to do the minimum possible. Because what does bureaucracy does? Bureaucracy says, we don't trust you.
Yeah.
We don't care about your time. And we don't want you to do anything different. You want to improve? No, don't improve things. You want to work efficiently? No, we have all this paperwork and we don't trust you. So the same person, when they face a bureaucratic system, they basically say, why should I work hard? Why should I stay after the 5 o'clock clock? Now, the same person in a different environment could be very different. Now, there are people.
So hold
Go
on.
ahead.
So I find that absolutely fascinating, because that notion or the idea that by being bureaucratic, you kill motivation. But what do you say about, especially in organizations where the bureaucracy is an attempt to have alignment, to have standards, to have a certain bar that you're gonna you
Of
aim
course.
for. So how then do you then balance this idea that you're gonna have to have some base, but you're gonna motivate? So how does that conflict
so
work?
obviously you're correct, right? Obviously bureaucracy has a reason. It's not as if somebody sat there and said, let's kill motivation.
That's just it.
There's lots of reasons to have procedures and standards. And part of it is the question of how you explain it. So let's take things like safety precautions. You work in mining. I'm sure there's a lot of issues with safety. And I'm sure that, like everywhere in the world, people don't always fulfill all the safety requirements. You don't have to say anything. But let's just say
thanks.
Yeah. Let's just say it's the same thing. The reality is that most people who don't feel all the safety requirements are not doing it because they want to risk themselves. They're doing it because they want to get the work done. And they feel that the safety requirement is just standing in their way. I'll give you an example. I consulted with a gas company, and they gave instructions to their people that when there's a gas leak, they should park illegally and run as quickly as possible to fix the gas leak. These people also did not wear the safety equipment. Why? Because they got the instruction that time was of the essence. So in effect, they were risking themselves for the mission of the company. Like in many ways, they were altruistic. Now, what the company basically didn't do, they didn't emphasize why they are doing this. They felt parking fine is just a bureaucratical thing, and working this gear is just because we have to. It's not because it's the company really cares. So you're right that there is bureaucracy that says this is what we're doing and this is the reason we're doing that. So you could say, we learned that people have made these mistakes before, and this is why we create the safety procedures. And I want you to be proud of that. Now, you could take the same thing and make it into professional pride. If you look at the Marines, for example, in the US, they are proud of their precision. They are proud of the way they have their weapon and their uniform and all the details. They are proud of it. It's not bureaucracy. It's part of professional pride. It's not somebody that says, here's a rule.
Yeah. Can you say that again? I mean, because the idea that, and I love that, because the military is extremely bureaucratic, or it's hierarchical in its nature, right? So then that idea of really, and I guess what you're saying is that you're shaping, I guess, the idea of
it's basically the identity. So when something comes from the outside and it feels like an arbitrary rule without an explanation, it could be bureaucracy. Wow. The same thing can be framed as part of identity. Now, if you look at uniform, it's a really interesting example. The way people have their uniform is central to how they are. By the way, people who serve in the army, some people have told me that they act very differently when they have the uniform on and when they're civilians, when they don't. And they say things like, in a uniform, I will never take a cigarette and throw it on the street. I will never take a Coke can and not recycle it. It's a part of saying, this is an identity issue. I keep it. There's a reason. This is how we do things. It's not just an arbitrary thing that somebody told. So
I love that.
So when we talk about bureaucracy, there's a lot of things that I understand. The things that I complain about are things that don't serve the organization, but are serving some other function.
So, and I guess in that, what I'm really hearing is that you tapping into a larger level of meaning. Because if you go pride, then you're really talking about, you've tapped into somebody's inner essence. And so what is that link, or how would you explain the link between?
Let me give you.
Go for it.
Yeah, let me give you another example. Imagine an oil rig. Imagine an oil rig in the middle of an ocean, and the drills in this oil rig are designed to be very, very sensitive. So, every time there's an alarm, it's 99% chance that it's nothing, right? Because they have what's called false alarm rate, right? They have a lot of warning. Now, imagine that you're a captain of an oil rig and there's an alarm. And what you're supposed to do by the rules is to stop everything, close the rig, take out the drill, make sure it's okay. And then if it's okay to continue, if it's not, fix it. But if you do that, it's going to be very expensive. You're going to take a lot of time from oil. So you say to yourself, let me wait 10 minutes. Maybe the little red light will go away. And you wait 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And most of the time, the red light goes away because it was supposed to come out 99% of the time. It was supposed to come out when there's nothing. So you learn from experience that it's a good idea not to listen to the red light, because every time you listen to the red light, you didn't listen to the red light and nothing bad happened. You say, was a good idea. Was a good idea. And then, of course, at some point, there's an oil spill and your company loses billions of dollars and you basically realize you haven't done the right thing. That's basically what happens with lots of safety things, that people are not safe. And in most cases, it works out for them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, even if you look at your environment, I'm willing to bet that when people are not safe, it's very rare that they get injured.
The first time. Yeah.
Most of the time they're unsafe and it worked for them. Like, I don't need this. Now, this, by the way, is what is the cycle. This is the loop of low probability events, right? The same thing happened in texting and driving. You think to yourself that the probability of texting and driving and something bad happening is 1%. So one day you text while driving and nothing bad happens. But after you did it, you say, maybe it's not 1%, maybe it's 0.9%. And then you keep on doing it and keep on doing it until eventually there's an accident. Now, that's the problem when you let people learn from experience. They're just learning the wrong lesson. Now, these people are not bad people. They're good people. In fact, they have a mission. They're there to help the company. They're there to do the right job. Sometimes they don't like the heat from some safety equipment. Sometimes it's too heavy, but it's mostly for a good reason. But of course, the outcome is very bad. Somebody designed that. If you explain it to them, that's a different story. Like, why do you do this? But then if you get them to be proud of it, then it's not about the outcome. It's about doing the thing for its own sake, right? And that's a very good achievement. When you say, I don't shut the oil rig because there was a red light. I shut it because that's my ideology. I do it for me. I don't do it because of the outcome. This is my professional duty. My professional duty is, this is my professional standards, and here is how I do things. And what is important is, if you look at the oil rig, it's very important to tell the person you did the right thing, that you turn it off when it was red, whether it was the drill was working or not working.
Yeah.
In the same way that when somebody wears imagine in our example from the gas leak, if somebody wears all the equipment and they run as fast as they can and they missed it, you should say, congratulations, you did the right thing.
Yeah.
You stopped, you wore the safety equipment, you did the right thing. So the idea is that we need to reward, and the military is very good at that. We need to reward the process and not the outcome.
Wow.
Right? We need to say, if you wore the safety equipment, if you did this, you did the right thing.
Rewarding the process and not the outcome is love that saying. And I love that idea. Now, for me, what I'm really trying to get to is, how do I build that intrinsic motivation? How do I get like an individual to, and you say, obviously it's about that reward system, right? So that idea that you've done well and you recognize it regardless of the outcome. And so I think it's easier to...
Let me clarify. Let me clarify something. So rewarding the process and not the outcome doesn't have to be intrinsic motivation. It can still be extrinsic motivation. You can still be rewarding it from the outside. Yeah. But like, for example, one last example of this. If you have two kids, one is studying very well, studied 90% of the material, but the exam was mostly about the last 10% of the material, so they got an okay grade. The other kid didn't study that much, studied 10% of the material. Most of what they studied was in the exam. They got a very good grade. Which kid do you want to say, congratulations, continue? The kid that studied well.
The first kid. Yes.
Long term, it's the right approach. When we do the right thing, the world should say, congratulations, you did the right thing, not about the outcome. There are many things that where the outcome and the process are very, very different. Okay, so that's about rewarding process and not outcome. Your other question is, how do we get people to be intrinsically motivated? And this goes back to, I think, our first example from the marathon. I think most people have the ability to be intrinsically motivated. It's only that some companies reduce it for them. I think it's part of the human potential to be intrinsically motivated. I think
the companies reduce it?
Yeah. Okay, the companies
continue. Kill it. Okay.
I think it's people want hobbies. People want to feel meaningful. People want to feel that they're good spouses and good friends and they're contributing to society. And I think companies that are allowing this to flourish are basically saying to people, take all of your motivation and have them here at work. Because if you come to work for many hours a day, you might as well get more of it. Yeah. So think about the people who work for you. What do they feel is their contribution to their families? What do their families feel is the contribution of these people to the family? I asked this question. I asked people, how many of you feel that your families appreciate sufficiently how hard you're working to provide for them? So I don't think they understand it.
Good. Yeah.
But people are at work partially to provide for their families. How often do these people get thanks? Not very often.
Not often.
How much do people don't answer about your organization, but how often do we thank people who work for us? How many times do we come to people and say, you're just incredible. I've seen you work. I really appreciate what you do. How much do we ask people for their input? How much do we give people a chance to progress? So I'm a university professor. I have a research team at Duke. But for example, in my research team, everyone has a 5-year career plan that we visit every year. Now, is this career plan necessarily going to happen? No. Will they necessarily stay for 5 years? No. But it's one of my ways to say, I care about your career development. I want to understand what it is that you want to do more. Yeah. Imagine that you worked for me and I said, Ziki, I see you working. I know you want to progress. What courses would you like to take that you think would help your career? Is there any online education that you think you would like? Is there anything that I could help to unleash your potential? Very different story. Yeah. Now we're talking about the future. We're talking about development. So I think, by the way, there are people that had terrible bosses and those bosses have destroyed their will. They're just zombies, right? They're just here for the paycheck. They don't care and so on. But I think that's a minority. I think most people in the right flourishing environment would work much harder.
So I've got a question about those minority groups, right? Would you say that you could resurrect? I mean, that idea of somebody who's had such a really tough experience before and turning that ship around, that's a lot of work. Do you think it's possible to turn it around, and do you think it's worth the time to turn it around?
So first of all, I think that for most people it's possible to turn them around. I think that a little bit like divorce, people start a new relationship, they can forget some of the old one and get into some new patterns. I think sometimes it's very hard to do in the same organization. If you have a deep failure of trust with your boss and you feel betrayed, let's say something even simple. You worked very, very hard. They promised you a promotion and then they gave a promotion to their cousin instead of you. I don't think there's a way to recover that. I don't think there's a way to recover. By the way, fairness is incredibly important. Let me say a word about fairness. Imagine in our evolutionary history, when we were hunter-gatherers, and imagine that you and I went hunting together. Then imagine we went hunting and then we split. You went to the right, I went to the left. What is it that I want you to internalize? I want you to internalize fairness. I want that if you find an apple or a rabbit, whatever it is, that you will share it with me. Now, if I supervise you and if we hunt it together, you'll share it with me because I'm there with you. But what if you're by yourself? I want to know that I can trust you. And because of that, if I learned that I couldn't trust you, I would get very annoyed because I would want to teach you a lesson, because you and I are going to keep on hunting together with the same part of the small community. So fairness is incredibly important. So what we find, for example, is fairness in salary, fairness in promotion is incredibly important for human motivation. And when it doesn't happen, it creates a huge break in motivation. So I think that most people can be recovered, sometimes not in the same job. Sometimes they need to move to a new company to have that. But I think moving to a new company or having a new boss is a real opportunity for restarting things.
Research and fully agree with that.
You know, nobody wants to go to work when they hate work.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to go and hate it. Everybody prefers to go and love what they're doing and feeling that they're accomplishing things. And the thing is, how do we help create that? And sometimes organizations do things that show people that they don't care. And that's what I mean by bureaucracy, that sometimes bureaucracy shows people that, we pretend that we care about you, but here's a proof. We don't really care.
And so I then have the question around that whole idea of proof that you don't care. And what would you say about, elements like deadlines or fear mongering or, some of these incentives that look like they are there for you? And I'll use the example that I think you might be aware of, or what you said, like the nurses didn't know that removing a Band-Aid fast was actually a negative experience compared to moving it slowly.
That's right.
What would you say about the tools that we use in order to try and motivate people? The aspect of deadlines and the aspect of fear around that whole idea of building trust, building environments of fairness, and building motivation.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of organizations that encounter some bad behavior want never to see that behavior again. So they create a rule, understand the rule, and the rule has reasons and it has costs. And very often the cost outweigh the reasons. So imagine, I'll give kind of a bad example, but imagine you had a petty cash box and one day you found out, and people use the petty cash box for all kinds of things. So if you need to buy some screws or something, you have a petty cash box. And one day you found out that somebody used the petty cash box to buy his girlfriend a pen. So you get upset and you say, let's not have a petty cash box from now on. From now on, every time you want to buy something for 10 cents, you need to submit the paperwork and proof and three copies and so on. What happens? What happened is that, yes, you saved the company from somebody misusing the money for a pen, but you created, everybody now has to waste their time on that. And as they do that, they say, do I really need to fill 3 duplicates of this thing for taking something from the cabinet? So that's what I mean, that people will make mistakes from time to time. That's part of human nature. We all make mistakes. Like, think about, on average, when you type a page, how many typos do you have? We have mistakes. We make mistakes all the time. Some worse, some bad. And there's an approach that's saying we have zero tolerance to mistakes. And there are some mistakes that we should have zero tolerance for. Example, things that have to do with safety. We should really work hard on that. But there are many things that we should say, what's the cost and benefit? And if the cost is very high, then maybe we should do something softer. Reduce the chance that somebody will buy a pen, but not eliminate it, but also not create bureaucracy. So lots of time companies do things that are like that. I can tell you a lot of stories from my world about it, but I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
So think about days. I'm trying to think about something that would be very general, but think about something like work-life balance.
Yeah.
From my perspective, if one of my researchers is going to see a doctor, is this work or is this life? It's both.
Yeah.
Right? Why should they take time off to see a doctor? They work much of their work, waking hours, they're at work. All of a sudden, if they need to see a doctor, doesn't come out from work time.
Yes.
I don't understand the logic exactly. Or what if somebody reads a book that is both for home and for work. If it's a book about social science, or in your world, maybe people are reading something about safety, or they're reading something about the history of mining, or they're reading about what kind of usages there might be in the future for whatever you're mining, or is this work, or is this not work? So I think we have this rule: this is work and this is not work. But in many cases, you're saying it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that you're sick. You're sick as an employee, not just as a human being. And with COVID, you got sick at work from somebody at work. We got you sick,
but it's not.
But you now have to fix it on your own time. It's not clear exactly why. It's not exactly why. So I think it's things like that basically say to employees, we're just here for the labor. We're not really partners. If you want to get people to be motivated, you need to give people the sense that we're here in some partnership. You and I are working together. We have a joint goal. There's a story that Kennedy came to the airspace when they were planning to send the first mission to the moon. And he meets all these people and so on. And then he sees a person walking around with a bucket and a mop. And he says, "What are you doing?" The guy says, "I'm sending a person to the moon." So even though he was the janitor, he was cleaning, but he was part of the mission, right? How do we get that feeling? How do we get that feeling from people that they are part of the mission? I think the organization wants to say, you do this task and you do this task and you do this task. But if you want to be motivated, you have to think about the mission of the organization. I'll give you one other example. Lots of organizations give some money to charity, but it's usually the significant other of the CEO that chooses what charity to go to, and they go to the gala. As the employees, how connected do they feel to that?
Zero.
Not very. What happened if you said, this is the money of the company. Here are 10 charities we're considering. Why don't all of you vote? That's a very different feeling of connection to the mission of the company. How often do all the employees come to sit in the meeting of all the company? Where are we going? How are we doing? What are we thinking about? Organizations want people to feel like they are partners, but we don't treat people like, many organizations don't end up treating people like partners. They end up treating them as people who are substitutable. We'll give you a cubicle and we'll switch your cubicle from time to time. This is not a relationship. You're here just for now and we can substitute to it anymore.
So, and I completely hear everything that you're saying, right? In high pressure environments or environments where you have to hold people to account, that idea of that partnership sometimes has the other side of the coin, which has accountability or repercussions, right? And those typically come in the form of like deadlines or something that might be perceived as a threat. If we don't get this, you lose your job. You've got this time frame to do X. Whether it's realistic or not is a different story. I go, it's great to have, let's all get together and let's all get along kind of feel. But the environment sometimes does not allow for you to have that flexibility. Now, how do I then manage that balance between accountability and motivation? Because at times those two might be conflicting.
So first of all, let's talk about fear. Fear is a very, very effective emotion for the short term. Like if I had a short-term goal and I wanted people to drive forward something, fear would be very good short term. It's not very good long term. Long term, it's devastating to work under fear. People don't sleep, they get stressed. It's not as if under fear you have all of a sudden more cognitive capacity. In fact, you have less cognitive capacity. You're more stressed. You're more likely to make mistakes. I'm now in Israel. I arrived here a few days ago. There are lots of alarms, and I drove twice when there were alarms. Very high fear. People are making unbelievable mistakes driving. It's unbelievably frightening to drive. I mean, there's the missiles outside. Aside from the missiles, stress is not an environment when people thrive in long term. You want to get them to do something one time, go for it. So I think that punishment and stress are not good long-term strategies. Short-term strategy, but not long-term strategy. In terms of accountability, I think you need accountability. I'm not against accountability, but accountability need to be about the process, not about the outcome. So, we have to understand that the world is what is called stochastic. There's a random element. Sometimes you could do everything correctly and you could do your best, but it ends up not working out correctly. Not because you did anything, just because there was
One
some
of the variables.
storm or the price of gold change or
Yeah.
Apple change its course or something like this happened. So I think you need accountability, but you need to be accountable for, did you do your job? Not about the outcome. And now you're more in control, because if you're accountable to the outcome, X% of it is not under your control.
Yeah.
It's just adding stress. What if there's a storm? So I think, yes, accountability is good and important, but we need to hold people accountable to the process and not the outcome. And we need to celebrate when the process worked out well, even if the outcome did not. So I think there is a lot of room for giving people positive motivation. Like, there's unbelievable room to give people positive motivation. Think just about teamwork. Right? So I helped once a company, and what we did was we gave people once a month $25 gift certificate to give somebody else in the team who helped them out. And in the beginning, nobody gave it. So we forced them to do. So you have to, somebody in the last month help you. Just the person who helped you the most, give it to them. And we encourage them to write a nice note with it. Think about what this did. It was basically to create a culture of saying thank you. It's a culture of people helping each other more. So if you ask, how do we diagnose the culture? We need to diagnose what are people doing in terms of risk, where's motivation coming. And a lot of the motivation, a lot of time is not from the mission of the company, is, am I helping my buddies?
Yeah.
So how do you reward that? How do you reinforce it? How do you make it more likely? Imagine in your environment, are people saying thank you enough? If your answer is no, then you can say, okay, so how do I build a structure where people feel more gratitude to other people? And how do we do it normally, not just once in a while? I'll give you one other example. I know our time is running out, but I'll give you one last example. There was a very important organization that I helped that people worked on security issues. And sometimes people were on their way home and there was some emergency and they turned around and they went into hiding for 2 weeks. Like, not hiding, but they worked on security issues in some, underground somewhere. Families didn't see them. All the plans got canceled. And the idea there was that the families were paying a lot of price for that, but they did not understand how important the work was. So we got the head of that group once a year to meet with the families, spouses, kids, and not to tell them anything secret, but just to tell them how proud they are of what they're doing and how important it is and so on. Like, imagine somebody has to be in this conflict. If I do this, it's good for work, but my family don't like me.
Yeah.
What a terrible situation. How do we get the family to support the person? Anyway, there's lots of ways to think about it, but I think that humanity, if you ask me kind of a summary, I think we have a huge potential for positive motivation. And I think there's endless benefits in exploring that. It could come from family appreciating somebody. It can come from a sense of progress. It can come from a sense of relationship, a sense of fairness, contribution, learning new things, improving, all kinds of things. It can be all of them. But we need to take all of those elements of motivation and see which one of them we could emphasize, improve.
And, it's, I find that it's so refreshing, because especially the way you sort of laid it out, it's one of those things I think is, you make it sound a lot easier than it actually is. I have to admit to that. But I think one thing that you highlight is the idea of fairness and the idea of trust, and the idea centered around the
trust,
process.
Appreciation. I want to be clear. I don't think it's easy, but it's doable.
And that's actually very, very fair and very, very true, because it won't be easy, but it is possible and it's doable. And that says the world of everything that we really should motivate us. And so within that moment, I think I'd like to go to the quote of the episode. And the quote of the episode for me, I've happened to stumble upon it, but the most difficult thing is to recognize that sometimes we too are blinded by our own incentives, because we don't see how our conflicts of interest work on us. I don't know if you might be aware of that quote and what it might mean.
I am.
It's a quote from you, and the reason why sort of this resonated with me with regards to what we talked about is that I think a lot of the times we are incentivized, whether it's for a short-term gain, whether it's just for a short-term win, whether it's because of a certain short-term pressure, and then we lose that idea of a larger and a bigger picture that might work against us in a longer and a more sustainable process. And I'll use the example of, again, the nurses that you talked about, where though they might not necessarily have been aware that removing the Band-Aid was inflicting pain on you fast, that they were not aware that what they were doing was having a negative repercussion and no fault of their own because they didn't know any better. And where we are right now within this conversation really talks to how do we learn or unlearn certain things that we have got an intuition towards, and that might be bias. And in fact, even more so than that, might be founded on the idea that is results driven as opposed to process driven. A lot of the time we will go, because I got this result, my process was correct and right. And that then fuels a certain way that you work, a certain element that you sort of progress through life. And your story of having the burns is the first part of appreciating that though your process, your result might have been good, your process might not have been the best. Whether it is half the face being shaved, and what did that mean on a larger scale internally, whether you realized it or not. That was talking to the idea of understanding that the actions don't always, the result doesn't always equal to something meaningful, something progressive, something healthy. And only when you got the messages from people who realized and appreciated the fact that you're building courage within them. Oh, well, actually, it was a mistake. You went somewhere, you couldn't shave for a month, came back with half a beard, and then that's what happened. Like you were there, like, and then now suddenly you're getting feedback, and that whoever wanted to tattoo the other half of your face to give you stubble so that it could blend in, or the fact that you used to shave the other side to make sure that it looked less. In the end, you kept it, and a lot of people thanked you for it. And the two strange things you appreciated from that was the courage that it then gave others, that you appreciated the courage that it was giving, that and the impact that you were giving out. And the internal part of that conversation was yourself, a better ability to appreciate and to be at peace with your own journey, with your own purpose. And the idea of being less different, it's okay to be different. Having pride in not blending in, that self-acceptance, and how that talks to that social science. And that social science, how that part talks about predicting what people would do or how we should look at motivation. Because in the end of it all, people, and I was going to say to you, I was training. And I hated every second of it. I actually had an injury. I struggled to walk. I actually didn't feel like I was going to be able to start running. I didn't feel like I was going to start running. And in the end, what ended up happening was it was a very unhappy moment. I then built up that capacity and ability to start running. And when as I did that, I slowly grew in my motivation because I could see progress, even though it was painful and difficult. And sometimes that whole notion of motivation does not equal happiness was one thing that sort of resonated with me within that. But at the end of the day, bureaucracy kills trust. And why does it kill trust? Because it loses people in their journey. It gives them a reason why not to work, why they are not important, why their inputs are not important. And for me, it takes away from that pride element. When you don't have pride, you lose a lot. And I love the idea of identity with uniform and how that can bring and bridge a gap between full motivation as well. And that motivation that lives deep within. And so at the end of the day, we're trying to tap into people's ideology, my professional duty, my, and we have to be able to reward people for doing the right thing despite the outcome and rather based on the process. People want to be good people. They want to contribute. They want to look at their family. They want to have inputs. And at the end of the day, I personally think that, like a divorce, you can move past having had a bad experience into being into a good experience, but you want fairness. You want a salary, you want promotions that are fair and transparent. And sometimes if we lack the explanation behind the bureaucracy, we lack the ability to build that fairness, to build that trust, to build that buy-in and pride. And a lot of those things then stem into bad behavior and bad cultures that people then don't really appreciate. And I love the part where Dan talked about work-life balance, as though we can separate the two, work and life, and that balance doesn't need to exist, rather looking at it as a holistic point of view. And though $25 is given out to people for them being able to contribute, for me, I felt that it's an incredible thing to be able to thank somebody else. That selfless nature, combining that unity and essentially allowing for people to work together, even though the outcome might not be great, even though it might not be intuitively simple or common. For me, that ability and the reason why this code really speaks out, so difficult to be blinded by our own incentives, that we don't see how these incentives might be negative towards our own work interests or self-interest. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today. And I so many nuggets here. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for joining us.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.